the unknown mechanic back again, and we're here to help out the shop owner who's got Scratch, Dingus, and Gomer working for him, and also the do-it-yourselfer who maybe want to attempt this kind of repair on your own to see how it's done the right way. And if you are an aspiring mechanic, then you can learn from this and not end up being a Scratch, Dingus, or a Gomer. So today we're working on a Briggs and Stratton 7 horsepower flathead that's on a BCS two-wheeled tractor with a sickle bar on it, sort of the mid-90s vintage, and it came in primarily for a clutch. The owner was complaining that the clutch wasn't releasing, and actually the owner belongs to Skunk Scat. Yeah, so anyway, Skookum brought it in, and he said that the clutch wasn't releasing, and so he kept trying to adjust the clutch cable tighter and tighter and tighter. Didn't work. And so what I found is the original clutch from 1990 that fits the 7 horsepower Briggs. It uses a key and a set screw, and as you can see, the key is very badly worn. The clutch was loose and was rocking on the crankshaft, and investigating this, it appears that the clutch is actually cracked in the inside diameter here. And what's really wrong with it is that hidden inside this clutch, there's another bearing besides the throwout bearing. The clutch fork would rest on the throwout bearing and push the cone in from the cup, and then it would separate the power from the transmission. But there's another ball bearing inside the clutch that obviously is going bad, and wouldn't allow the clutch to completely release. It was trying to turn the tranny. So this clutch has totally been superseded to a new style of clutch that is a taper lock, and it has no key. It uses a 1-inch tapered split bushing, 1-inch ID, and when you torque this onto the crankshaft, it locks better than the key and the keyway in the original design. So that's what's in there now. And after I replaced the clutch and addressed a few other issues, there was a bad cable, an instant reverse cable that was about to fail. It was only hanging on by a couple of strands, so I replaced that too. And then I got to the point where I could run it, and it ran very well. Started easily, idled well, full power, no surging, but I thought the job was done. But when I parked it the next morning, there was a puddle of gas under it. And so I had shut the fuel shutoff off and moved it to a different spot. And I ran it again and parked it in a different place. And everywhere I parked it, it would leave a puddle of gas. And eventually, it didn't leave a puddle of gas because the tank was empty. So I knew there was something wrong with the carburetor. And so it's got a flathead 7 horsepower Briggs with this 2-piece updraft. Briggs and Stratton calls it a flow jet, 2-piece flow jet. And this carburetor was used for decades on many of the single cylinder Briggs. And a lot of people, would never be able to figure out how to stop them from leaking fuel. So I'm going to go over that. I wanted to make the video as short as possible. So I have already removed the carburetor off the engine, already have put it in the sonic cleaner, already have looked up the parts that I want to use and replace, and just to keep the video short. So what I found was that the float needle, it's got a rubber tipped float needle that goes against a brass seat, and I'm going to try to bring this in for a close-up here, and hopefully bring that in. And tremendous amount of wear, a lot of wear. So that's the issue, but I want to cover all of the possible leaking areas just so you know what to do. These two-piece flow jets, there's a fuel tube, emulsion tube, that crosses from the lower body to the upper body. And you always want to remove this first before you undo the 3 float bowl screws. If you just undo the 3 float bowl screws and then force this apart, you are going to destroy this crossover tube. And there were some remnants of the old gasket on the carburetor body, even after the sonic cleaning. So I've already removed those, and I'm ready with a new gasket. This is a 27918 Briggs and Stratton float bowl gasket. This is a 270684 intake gasket for here, and this is the needle and seat kit that I'm going to use, and I'm going to explain why I'm going to use this one. So other areas where these can leak, one of the ones that's the hardest to find is there is a tapered seat inside the carburetor body, and that can become corroded and pitted, and that seat mates against this taper. I'm going to bring this in for a close-up. Okay. That taper has to tightly seal against the carburetor body. And if it doesn't, you're going to get a leaker. And if you want to try to repair a carburetor that has a pitted, corroded seat down in there, you can take an old nozzle and put some lapping compound right on that taper, and you have to file off the threads so there's no threads on the jet, and that will allow the screwdriver, and you can use it like a battery powered screwdriver at a low RPM, and you can turn this with lapping compound on that seat, and it will refinish the carburetor body, and it can eliminate a leak. There's another method that I've seen used before. I don't think I've ever tried this method, but this is a 391413 repair kit for the older pulse-jet, vacuum-jet carburetors that had the diaphragm between the carburetor and the tank, and if the tank or the carburetor became warped, the gas would bypass the diaphragm and make the engine run rich. And what this kit consists of is a little roll pin and these Teflon washers. You can take a Teflon washer and put that in on the tank top and put the Teflon washer over the roll pin, and that Teflon washer would seal if your tank or carburetor were not perfectly flat. But you can also use this Teflon washer out of this repair kit, and you can get the Teflon washer over the end of the nozzle and down here where it will hopefully seal this taper. Now, I'm not going to do that because I know that that is not a problem with this carburetor. The problem why this one is leaking is that float needle is completely worn out, and I no longer, I don't trust the seat that's been pressed into this carburetor body. I'm going to replace that seat. Now, another area where these things can leak is if the float is bad. And the way you can test these floats is you can just take them out, and if you shake them and you hear liquid gasoline splashing inside of the float's no good. And if you don't hear any liquid splashing around inside the float, you can also test these by getting some very hot water. Get a bowl of hot water, and you can immerse the float in the hot water, and the heat will cause the air inside the float to expand, and if there's a small hole anywhere in the float, you're going to see the bubbles coming out, and that would indicate that the float is bad. Now, a lot of people think that, you can just, solder the hole in the float. Well, you don't want to do that. The majority of these are actually kind of an outdated brass floats or old technology. Most of the modern floats are plastic, and the plastic ones are a little bit more impervious to water and other contaminants in the fuel. But going to these old school brass floats, you can't just solder up a hole in the float. And the reason why is that these floats are manufactured in a vacuum, lower than normal air pressure at sea level. And they're manufactured in a vacuum, and then they're sealed with this solder joint. And so these floats are more buoyant than just a float that's manufactured under normal atmospheric pressure. So it's lighter in weight than if you just took a brass float and soldered a dead hole in it. It floats more. So, if there's a hole in the float, replace it. This float, there's no issue with this. Another trick that sometimes I do with these old type of carburetors that have a lot of brass parts is you can use a tarnish remover and dip these things in the tarnish remover and put some tarnish remover on it, and it makes the brass look brand new. This one I didn't do anything to. It came out of the carburetor like that. It's nothing wrong with it. This one I put in the sonic cleaner, and I did dip it in the tarnish remover, and these do not come in the carburetor overhaul kits. Many years ago, Briggs and Stratton used to supply these, and there's more than one of these. There are different part numbers for different families of engines. You can't just get one of these and use it for every flathead Briggs with a updraft two-piece flow jet carburetor. And some of them have been discontinued. So, you got to search for new old stock or find an aftermarket substitute if you've got a bad nozzle. This one cleaned up just fine. There's nothing wrong with it. The carburetor is going to go back together with that. Another way that you can static test for leaks is you can put this back into the lower carburetor body. And by the way, Briggs and Stratton does make some special jet screwdrivers to remove some of their carburetor jets. There's a small one, which is a 19061, and there's a larger one, which is a 19062, which is the one that fits this one. And fits the jet very well, prevents you from, stripping out the slot. Brass is soft, and if you, have a scratch, a dingus, or a gomer working for you, the next thing you know, he's going to come up and say, "Oh, I can't get the jet out of the carburetor." And you look down in there, and it's all boogered up and totally hopeless. You have to have the right tools, and this is the right tool. Okay, so I've seated that down in there, and what you can do if you want to static bench test this is you can fill the float area of the float bowl with fuel. You could probably fill it up almost 3/4, 7/8 of the way near the top. And if you see fuel leaking, seeping from around that jet down in that body, you've got a problem. If you fill this up and you clamp it in some sort of fixture and leave it overnight, and the next morning you come back and the fuel is still up to the top and it's all dry in there, this is a rebuildable carburetor. There's no issue. Another static test you can do if you wanted to test the float needle, you can obviously use connect a pressure tester and put your float on here and invert the carburetor body upside down. And you would want to do this with some fuel, like a wet needle and seat. Don't dry test it. Test it wet and, pump it up and see if it holds pressure. And that's another, quick little bench test you can do that'll, if it's going to leak, it's going to leak and you'll know it right away. But if it passes, these tests and you still want to bench static test it, you can completely rebuild the carburetor, and you can, connect a remote fuel supply. Get a fuel line and a funnel, and set it up on a fixture and fill that funnel up with fuel and let this carburetor sit overnight. And you come back in the morning and you look on your workbench, and if there's a big puddle of gas on your workbench and there's no fuel in the funnel and fuel line, you've got a problem. So those are the ways that you can test before you actually put it back on the engine and try to run it and adjust it and send it out. You don't want to go further until it's passed some tests that you're satisfied, because you just end up removing the carburetor back off the engine and going back and repeating something that you should have done the first time. Another thing that Briggs makes is they make a thread chasing tap set for these flow jet carburetors, because these jets are a fine pitch thread. They're not just a standard thread. They're finer than a fine thread. And, one is a 1/4 32 and the other is a 5/16 32. And that part number for that tap set is a 19245. I've also added an extra tap in here. This is a tap I use for Tecumseh carburetors. If I want to chase those threads, I had to grind out between the flutes. It's a 2-flute tap, and that allows the nozzle in a Tecumseh carburetor to clear the center of the tap. So I can tap, and the tap will just miss the nozzle that's pressed into a Tecumseh carburetor body. So I have that too. Very valuable tools. Don't need them too often, but when you need them, you need them. Sometimes when these flow-jet carburetors have had water in them, these threads are very badly corroded, and trying to force the jet back out of badly corroded threads is almost impossible, and you're going to have a disaster. If you can chase the threads, these are bottoming taps. They'll get within 3 or 4 threads of the bottom of where it bumps into this jet, and that's going to greatly help. You have a short little spot of corroded threads, and once it's beyond that, it'll spin right out of the hole. And then you can go back in and chase that the remaining spot that's still corroded. And then when you rebuild the carburetor, the jet will spin right down in there and it'll seal. So valuable tools. Get those from Briggs. Now what we're going to do, since I know that the float is not an issue, and the carburetor body and this nozzle are not an issue, the real issue is severe wear on the float inlet needle. And that's worn so bad that I don't trust the seat. And Briggs makes a seat repair kit. Usually they would just give you the needle in the carburetor overhaul kit, or you would just buy the needle separately. But there's an additional part number. 394681 is the needle only. 394682 is the needle and the seat. So there's a brand new seat in this kit, and we are going to be removing the original seat and then pressing in the new seat and using a new needle, and that's going to guarantee that this is not going to leak. This engine, I don't think this carburetor has never been apart since the mid-90s. I'm the first person that's worked on this carburetor, so I know that this is going to fix the problem. Another area that you would want to check for on working these, if you got an engine that has very high hours on it, is you want to check for wear in the throttle shaft. And this one is more than acceptable. There's very little wear in this throttle shaft. If this was excessive, you'd get an erratic idle, and unfiltered dirty air would want to be drawn in through the throttle shaft bore and be inhaled into the engine, and that's not good. You would either want to replace the throttle shaft or replace the carburetor. If it's severely worn, just replacing the throttle shaft is not going to take up all of the wear. There will still be some wear in the bores in the carburetor body, and some of the smaller carburetors, there are replaceable bushings in the carburetor body that you can pull the bushings out and press new bushings in. And I don't know if this one has that or not. I'm not going to go that deep, but these parts are going to start to disappear and become no longer available. And then you're going to have to resort to, boring out the throttle shaft bore and pressing in the bushings and, trying to repair what is no longer available to keep, an old engine running. This one doesn't need it. Very, very close tolerance there. Very little play. So I'm not worried about that. So to get the seat out of there, Again, this is something that I would not trust Scratch, Dingus, or Gomer to do. If I gave them this, even though there's an instruction sheet on how to do it, provided inside with the parts, undoubtedly they would F it up and destroy it. So I have to do it. And what that involves is we're going to be using, this is my little homemade tool here. That tool is going to allow me to pull the old seat out of the carburetor body. I've got a 1/4-20 tap set, and there's a bottoming tap in this set. There's a plug tap and a normal taper tap in there. And I'm going to use the bottoming tap, and I'm going to cut some threads into the seat, and that will allow me to use a 1/4-20 bolt to pull that out of there. Okay, this, don't have to be super precise with this because it's just garbage. And you don't have to tap it all the way to the bottom either. That's probably enough. Okay, so now there's some 1/4-20 threads at the top of that bushing. And I've got a little receiver that I made on the lathe. It has one side of it has been relieved for clearance because there's a little spot there on the casting. So I've got to make sure that relief is positioned there, otherwise I'm going to damage the carburetor body. So this is just nothing more than a 1/4-20 by 2.5-inch Allen bolt and a grade 8 nut, and I'm just going to thread that in there. And then you need a 7/16 wrench, and you tighten the nut down, and it's going to pull the seat out. And I can feel it coming out. It wasn't in there that tight. But if Scratch, Dingus, or Gomer attempted this, they would destroy the carburetor. No doubt about it. Okay. Okay, now you can see that the old seat is now out, and there's no damage to the carburetor body whatsoever. And I'm going to be pressing this new seat in, and there's a little lead machined into the front part of the seat to allow it to start. And use some Loctite, a little bit of Loctite on there. And the instructions say to press that down flush. And the old seat is the ideal tool to use to push the new one in. And so I have a number 1 arbor press that, I have it's a very small arbor press, and it allows you to feel when you actually bottom, you can feel it. It's not going to go anymore. That's the press that I'm going to use. That's over another area. I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to go press it in. You don't need to see that part. It's just, just pressing the seat in. And I come back and I'll show the finished results. Okay, I've got my seat pressed in there. Bring that in. So it is flush with the carburetor body. Use a small amount of Loctite. Any little microscopic scratches or whatever are filled with the Loctite, no voids. So it should be the seal between the outside of the seat and the carburetor body is sealed perfectly. And I forgot to mention, I want to emphasize that the static bench tests, it does require you, when you're statically bench testing, you do have to have the power needle installed in the bottom of the carburetor in order to do those bench tests. So, forgot to mention that. It's important. And the instructions say that the float is to be an equal distance. If not, we're going to have to bend the float arm to adjust the level. Okay, so what the instructions say is that this distance has to be equal to that distance. And I checked it already. It's very, very satisfactory. I don't need to do any bending on the float at all. And this is where we want to install the float bowl gasket. Okay, we got a brand new float bowl gasket, and it does matter which way it goes. There's a upside down and a right side up. Okay, that's incorrect. So it's going to go the other way. And what I'm going to do, these gaskets always seal better when they're wet. So I'm adding some fuel. Nothing special, it's just fuel. 2-cycle fuel, it's my primer. And then I'm also I'm going to add some fuel into the seat, the needle tip. Going to make sure that your clip is clipped onto the float arm. Okay, now we can do the pressure test. See if we've got any leaks with our pressure tester. And I've got it up to about 10 psi, and it's holding rock steady. You can repeat. And it holds every time. So brand new needle and seat. Absolutely satisfied that this is going to work. And so in reassembly, we are going to just start the 3 screws that hold the upper and lower body together. We are not going to tighten them. Okay, they're just started. That's it. Okay, then this is important. Leaving the top body loose. This is where you install the main nozzle. It crosses over from the lower body into the upper body and it feeds the idle circuit. Okay, doesn't have to be Hercules tight. I just seated it. Now that that's tight, now you go back and you tighten the upper body to the lower body. And that's it. So I'm gonna cut the video short here, and you don't really need to see me install it back onto the engine. Don't need to turn this into an hour video, but it's going to go back on and it's going to run fine. It ran fine before I took it off. It just leaked. So hopefully you can learn a few tips there and do it the right way. And you know, if you're a do-it-yourself or homeowner, and the local shop has got your scratch, dingus, and gomer that are going to F up your Briggs, then this is the way you would want to do it. If you're a shop owner and your technicians don't know this stuff, this is going to help out. And if you're an aspiring mechanic and you want to do it the correct way, this is how you do it. Otherwise, you'll end up being a scratch, gomer, or a dingus. So that's probably about it on this. We're going to be working on this one here pretty soon. This is a rare item. This is a steel 050 AV. So those very rare saw. It's in good condition. So collector's item. Probably a few steel fans are going to want to see me tinker with that. So until the next one, this is the Unknown Mechanic. Hope that helped.